Jordon Shanks, Friendlyjordies social media superhero. He's funny, he's got a PhD in sarcasm, and I love his work, especially when he's criticising the abuses of the rich and powerful. He's kind of a bit like Batman. And I see he's just done a video attacking the Riddler. And that's what he calls me in his latest video.
His name's Peter Ridd, and for that reason, it was the easiest nickname we've ever had to come up with here at Friendlyjordies. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the Riddler. He keeps claiming that the reef is so resilient that we don't need to worry about it. It'll sort itself out because coral just keeps bouncing back. What he always fails to mention is it's a specific type of no-frills budget shit coral. Like all the 500,000-year-old coral things, that's all gone, but that's fine. That doesn't matter. That loss of diversity.
He claims that my comments on the reef being at record good condition are all wrong and that all the coral on the reef is now just rubbish. And also strongly implies that I'm taking money from the rich and powerful to tell lies about the reef.
With the very industries who stand to benefit from the public perception that there's nothing wrong with the reef. That's right, he's got a mad sponsorship with the Queensland Cane Growers Association. A tank that has been funded over the years by the likes of Gina Reinhardt and companies like Shell, ExxonMobil.
Now, I'm on holidays fixing my mate Series 1, but I thought I'd take a little time to say, I am the Riddler. I've been the Riddler since primary school. And despite this Peter Ridd disguise I wear, people can still tell that I'm the Riddler. It's so annoying. The question is Jordon Shanks actually Batman? Did he actually slay me, the Riddler, with his humour, his intellect and his scientific arguments? Or is he actually the Joker who has inadvertently sided with the rich and powerful? Has he swallowed their lies so that they can crucify farmers and send our youth into suicidal depression about the state of the world? And to support organisations that earn billions of dollars a year to feather their nests and supposedly to protect the Great Barrier Reef, when in fact AIMS statistics show that the reef has never had more coral than it has today. So is Peter Ridd, aka the Riddler, paid by big business, big sugar, big oil, big coal, like Geordie insinuates? Well, Geordie, I don't get paid a cent from anybody. I'm an adjunct fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs. I'm unpaid. I actually insisted that I would not take payment so people would never accuse me of being paid to tell lies. Not that it actually seems to make any difference. People still do. And I like not being paid because it means I can do whatever I like and I can say whatever I like. Now, when I started work criticising the hopeless quality assurance on the Great Barrier Reef a decade ago at JCU, I knew it was going to get me into huge trouble. My own university was getting tens of millions of dollars of funding each year that depended on the Great Barrier Reef being doomed. The scientific community gets hundreds of millions a year on this very topic. So riddle me this, Geordie. How do you reckon those organisations reacted when the Riddler started to say that what they were doing was a load of rubbish? You got it, they fired me. And I've lost about 5 years' salary as a university professor, say 500 grand, and I had to fork out about 300 grand in legal fees to fight the university. Not exactly feathering my nest, but it does mean I can fix this bloody carburetor any time I like, so it's been worth it. And in the last 30 years, when I worked at JCU, I ran a commercial group that worked largely on monitoring dredging operations of ports to protect nearby coral reefs. Now, the university earned millions of dollars from that work, and we used all the profits to plough them back into scholarships and research. Not a cent went into my pocket. So, Geordie, you might think you were punching against the rich bastards, but actually you punched the little guy who just lost a large slab of his retirement funds. But I forgive you, you're young, and I won't say stupid, but you are young and easily conned by the masters of spin. But you're funny, and I can tell you that when you've been accused of corruption, it's much better when it's done by somebody with great humour, and I must say, I laughed most of my way through your video. I really did. And that brings me on to the science, because Geordie, in your whole video, you only really mentioned the science for a few seconds. Who pays somebody or what qualifications they have is secondary compared with the arguments they have and the evidence they present. So this data comes from the Australian Institute of Marine Science. It's their raw data. It's the amount of coral averaged over the perimeter of 100 reefs they survey each year, and it's at record high coral. Never been more coral since records began, according to the institution that you love so much. Now, remember, these institutions said that we had devastating bleaching in 2016, 17, 2020, 2022. Do you think they might be a little bit embarrassed by record high bleaching? So riddle me this, Geordie. How do you reckon they got around this little problem? They say, effectively, it's the coral that's come back and you swallowed it whole.
It's a specific type of no-frills budget shit coral. Like all the 500,000-year-old coral things, that's all gone, but that's fine. That doesn't matter. That loss of diversity.
And yes, the increase in the last decade has largely been the relatively fast-growing Acropora coral. Geordie, you call it coral, but actually it's the most beautiful and delicate coral on the entire reef. It's very easily smashed by cyclones. It's the favourite food of the coral-eating starfish, which are entirely natural. They're as natural as kangaroos are on the Australian mainland. The reason that the reef hit rock bottom in 2012 was because the Acropora was wiped out by the cyclones and starfish. So don't get surprised that when it recovers, we have lots of beautiful Acropora, because that was the coral that was smashed and got eaten in the first place. And it's funny, isn't it, that the scientists that you revere, who effectively now say there's too much of this beautiful Acropora, said in 2018 that there wasn't enough. It had all been destroyed by bleaching. So they said this: fast-growing staghorn and tabular corals suffered a catastrophic die-off, transforming the three-dimensionality and ecological functioning of the reef, changing the reef forever as the intensity of global warming continues to escalate. So forever lasted until 2022, because we've now never had more of this terrible Acropora coral. Or maybe we've actually just gone to heaven. That's what happens when you do a forever, isn't it, Geordie? So they said the reef was devastated by bleaching in 2016, 17, 20 and 2022. So riddle me this, Geordie. How did we lose maybe 93% of the coral in 2016 and much more in following years and end up with record high coral? Even Acropora takes years to regrow. Answer: they told untruths.
But that's fine. That doesn't matter. That loss of diversity.
Yes, there is a change in diversity of the coral. The species composition changes quite naturally from decade to decade. Reefs are very highly naturally variable systems. When they get hammered by a cyclone, the composition changes. The one thing that doesn't change is that the scientists will scream the end of the reef. They've been doing it since the 1960s, since when I was even younger than you are, Geordie. This is what they said in 2011. Coral cover in the central and southern regions of the Great Barrier Reef is likely to decline to 5 to 10% by 2022. But in 2022, we'd had an increase of between 200 and 300%. Geordie, you alluded to this sideways, and your commenters took this up with great enthusiasm, that I'm not qualified to talk about corals because I trained as a physicist rather than a biologist. And this is a very common misconception, that only biologists work on the ocean. But riddle me this, Geordie. Why did the Australian Institute of Marine Science employ me to study coral reefs and mangrove swamps? It's because physics is in everything. Did you know that I've worked on seagrasses, on corals, on mangrove crabs, even on sharks? And people have heard a lot about coral bleaching, which is caused by hot water. Well, to understand how the heat gets into the water to cook the corals, you have to understand things like latent heat, Stefan Boltzmann's law, the Navier-Stokes equation, fixed laws of diffusion. these are not things that the average biologist knows a great deal about. And what about looking at whether farm sediment is killing the reef? You were very keen to accuse farmers of killing the reef.
Why he insists that pesticide and fertiliser runoff has no effect at all on the reef. None.
Well, I co-invented the instrumentation to measure sediment on the reefs, and it shows that farmers were not guilty. Now, that is not something that most biologists do a great deal of. And you have to realise that physics is the queen of the sciences. But riddle me this, Geordie and your erudite commenters. Of the 4 scientists who discovered DNA, the building block of biology, how many do you think were biologists? Yes, well done. Only 1 was a biologist, the other 3 were physicists.
And the question then becomes, why is he so bloody keen on convincing the world that the Great Barrier Reef is a paradise in perfect state of nature?
Well, it's because it is in brilliant shape, maybe the most pristine ecosystem on Earth. And I hate it when untruths are told about the reef. In North Queensland, we're very proud of our reef, and we know it's in good state. So we don't take too kindly when people with no idea start running it down, or people who should know better, like the scientists who make a living out of saying it's damaged. And how do you think farmers feel when they're blamed for killing the reef? Well, I can tell you, it cuts them. It cuts them deeply.
I'm telling you, something big is happening in North Queensland. It feels larger than the usual industry funding a few press releases, especially when a lot of people seem to be too scared to talk about it.
So, Geordie, you're right. Something is going on in North Queensland. You got that bit spot on. A lot of us up here are getting just a little bit pissed off with the untrustworthy science institutions and the media who never ask them any hard questions.
A good way to tell if a scientist is well regarded in their field is how many citations their work has had. The Riddler's been cited 4,500 times. Sounds like a lot. Like, compare it to an actual coral reef expert like Terry Hughes, who works at the same uni Rid was fired from, he claims, for daring to question the dogma. Hughes has 81,000 citations. 4,500 citations is nothing, especially for somehow one of the most famous scientists in the country, which has been bugging me for quite a while now. Why? Why is Sky News always trying to push this very strange narrative that the Great Barrier Reef is great?
Now, Geordie makes a big deal that other scientists have got more citations than me, and this means that I should be just ignored. A citation is when another scientist quotes or refers to your work. I suppose it's a bit like counting likes in social media. Now, of course, if a scientist is part of a major group and they all agree with each other, they tend to cite each other's work, and they will rarely cite the scientists with which they disagree. Now, I'm certainly not part of the main consensus. And like the media, scientists tend to like a bad news story, which many of these scientists specialise in. So they cite the doom scenario, which is good for funding, and I come along and say things are fine. Well, they're not likely to cite that. So what I'm saying is as popular as a pork chop as a synagogue. But in science, it's not about consensus. When Einstein proposed his theory of relativity, he was in a minority of 1, and he had no citations whatsoever. So, Geordie, citations is like social media likes. It's about the weakest argument you could possibly have against a scientific theory. Geordie, I love the stuff you produce. I've watched quite a lot of your videos over the last years, and I know that you're a true rebel who delights in exposing lies and deceit. You're actually, you and I, kindred spirit. You're just a younger version, a bit funnier, a lot less polite. But you need to face that, like all superheroes, you have your weaknesses and faults. For Superman, it was kryptonite. For Batman, which is you, well, you're easily manipulated emotionally. You've made an error about me. I have a deep knowledge of the reef, and I'm paid by nobody. True, my views are not the consensus views, but you need to look at the data I present, and that's where you make your biggest mistake. because the data shows that without doubt, the reef is in great shape despite having these supposedly 4 devastating bleaching events in the last few years. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't need to care for the reef, and it doesn't even mean that it's going to be immune from climate change. But what it says for sure is that scientists have been exaggerating, especially in the last 10 years, but actually over the last 60s. It also says that you just got conned.